Well, good morning and welcome to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. We have a lot to cover this morning, and in the 7 o'clock hour, we'll be talking with Jason Nickerson. He is the president of John G. Ullman and Associates. He'll be joining us to talk about all the economy and investing. Did anyone happen to attend or at least drive by the Corning protest yesterday that we mentioned on the program? Kind of an anti-Trump, anti-Musk type protest. Quite a large number of people gathered. I happened to drive by myself. If you were in the area, I'd love to hear your thoughts. A lot of waves coming in. First off, coming in late last night, Trump congratulated U.S. forces after an airstrike that killed a terrorist leader in Syria. U.S. forces conduct a precision airstrike against a member of al-Qaeda in Syria this weekend. The terrorist leader was working with al-Qaeda across the region. Congratulations to CENTCOM Commander General Michael Kurilla and the U.S. warfighters who dealt justice to another jihadi threatening America and our allies and partners, the president added. The airstrike took place on Saturday and resulted in the death of a senior finance and logistics official in the terrorist organization Horas al-Din, which is an al-Qaeda affiliate. So that coming in late last night, as a lot of Trump posts do. Obviously, the big story this morning making the rounds is the Delta jet that crashed at Canada's Toronto Pearson Airport. This injured numerous passengers. The plane crash, which involved the Delta Airlines CRJ-900 jet that had departed from Minneapolis, was first reported by CTV. The flight was identified as Delta Connection Flight 4819, operated by Endeavor Air, and it carried around 80 people, 4 crew members and 76 passengers were on the flight. 18 people were treated for injuries following the crash, including 3 who were critically injured and taken to local hospitals. I mention this not just because it is breaking news that happened yesterday, because this is something that we warned about on yesterday's program. With the cuts that Doge is making, anything and everything will be blamed on said cuts. And we have a lot on Doge this morning. We do have a lot of updates that I have to get to start the program. But NBC News actually implied that Trump was to blame for the Toronto plane crash due to the cuts at the FAA. In terms of recent string of aviation incidents, this is going to get, yet again, raise a concern about FAA staffing, air traffic control staffing. This, Tom Costello, a senior correspondent with NBC News. Now, this is a Canadian air traffic control tower, and this is under Canadian authority. Once it crosses the border, and yeah, as you know, there's talks of maybe staff cuts at the FAA as part of President Trump's effort to trim down the federal workforce. The Trump administration recently started, quote, firing hundreds of employees at the FAA, with the Professional Aviation Safety Specialists Union saying that several hundred probationary workers had received termination notices as of Friday. Many of the workers were probationary employees, those employed for less than a year and lacking job protection, which make them low-hanging fruit for the Trump administration's streamlining efforts. And yeah, as you know, the FAA has been complaining for years that they are understaffed in critical job positions, especially air traffic control, Costello said, adding that he had spoken with somebody regarding whether air traffic control in America is being affected by the staff cuts. So this is just something I wanted to highlight in preparation of the articles that you can expect to come time and time again. As a matter of fact, far-left Representative Eric Swalwell falsely claimed that, quote, no president has had more plane crashes in their first month in office than Donald Trump. A statement that was easily debunked by the National Transportation Safety Board. Responding to the news of a single-engine plane that crashed shortly after takeoff from a small Georgia airport, this happened over the weekend. The California congressman claimed that President Trump had the most crashes under his belt within the first month in office than any other president. However, publicly available data shows the agency investigated 55 plane accidents in the U.S., with 24 resulting in injuries or death during former President Joe Biden's first month in office. But I'm just highlighting these examples to show you that, again, having not learned their lesson, they are going to blame every cut, the president in general, for every, whether in this case, plane crash or whether any type of incident regarding what they deem as responsible from the cuts coming from Doge. And we're going to talk about Doge, but I have a lot of updates I want to get to. We're going to be running very streamlined here this morning because we do have a special guest coming at the 7 o'clock hour. And I do want to remind you that fan favorite, Joe Sempolinski, former congressman, now assemblyman, he will be joining us on Thursday's broadcast. So make sure that you get your questions for Joe in ahead of time, if you don't mind. Another update, we brought to you the recent stories, I should say, of Canadians booing the Star-Spangled Banner at hockey games. Well, just days after Canadians in Montreal booed the U.S. national anthem at the Four Nations face-off, some Americans attempted to retaliate in Boston. On Monday, Team Canada held off Finland for a 5-3 win at the TD Garden. This time, some fans in attendance returned the jeers during the singing of O Canada. With the game not involving Team USA, the hostility on the ice did not exactly match that of Saturday night's contest that we talked about yesterday, where the Canadian crowd booed, and then there were numerous fights within the first few seconds of the game, reminiscent of slap shot? The Canadian boos likely came due to the current political climate. We know that. Well, the Canadian Flag Day booing seemingly wound up the Americans, who engaged in 3 fights in the round-robin game's first 10 seconds. I couldn't remember if it was that quickly in the first 10 seconds. Well, we knew it was going to happen, said U.S. defenseman Zach Werenski in reference to the boos. It happened the last game. It's been happening in the NHL before this, and we knew tonight was going to be the same way. We obviously don't like it. We kind of had an idea. We used it as motivation the best we could and found a way to get a win. But we had an idea going in, so it wasn't a surprise. Definitely don't like it, though. So just another update, a little retaliation, if you will, in Boston last night as the Boston crowd briefly booed the Canadian anthem in the Four Nations response. Also, as an update from a story that we brought to you late last week, I'm not even trying to segue other than giving you the updates. Border Czar Tom Homan has asked the DOJ to look into whether AOC has violated the law with the ICE evading webinar. Now, to give you an update, AOC had a webinar that she was promoting on how to avoid ICE, how to avoid deportation. She promoted it, though she did not, in full disclosure, she did not participate in the webinar itself. But Tom Homan has doubled down on his scrutiny of Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her attempts to help illegal immigrants evade authorities. He told Fox News again that he's asked the Department of Justice to look into whether her actions are illegal. And this news coming in kind of late yesterday. What I find disturbing is that any member of Congress wants to educate people on how they evade law enforcement, Homan said. Ocasio-Cortez did not appear on the webinar, but members of her office characterized ICE raids as political tactics that were intended to create fear and encourage migrants not to open their door if federal agents come knocking. Advice Homan has claimed could amount to obstruction of justice. You can claim, said Homan, you're educating those constitutional rights. Okay, you can keep that claim. Okay. But what she is in fact doing is telling people don't open the door, hide in your home, don't talk to ICE. We are talking about people who are in this country illegally, committed a crime. They are public safety threats, and they've been ordered removed by a federal judge. It's like AOC and others don't want ICE to enforce the law that they enacted. Now, Homan did not say he was pursuing charges against AOC, rather that he was asking the DOJ to look into whether her actions were impeding justice. I'm asking DOJ, where is that line of impediment? Where is that line of interference? I've simply asked the Department of Justice, give us that line. Asked directly whether he thought AOC was breaking the law, Homan said, I'll leave that up to the DOJ. So that is an update from yesterday's story. Also, how am I doing on time? Yeah, I want to get through all the updates before we take our first break. We talked yesterday about Sheryl Crow, which you're not going to hear me say that very often on this program. But Sheryl Crow, in a political statement, the singer, she sold her Tesla because she does not like Elon Musk, sold her Tesla and donated to NPR, saying maybe people will be able to hear the truth with her money. Well, we all know the bias at NPR. It's been a conversation conservatives have been having for a long time, that and PBS. But also, especially if you're in the media, you have an idea about this, how well-funded NPR and PBS is, not just by viewers like you and listeners like you, as they say during their commercials, but also by taxpaying dollars. So they normally have the best equipment. They have really opportunities most private entity media groups do not have. So it seems like kind of misguided donation. But FCC Chairman Brendan Carr weighed in on it, sarcastically cheering her after she sold her Tesla to protest Elon Musk. I know, this is what he tweeted, I know celebrities are hesitant to weigh in on hot button issues. Wow, dripping with sarcasm. So I appreciate Sheryl Crow making an argument here, not through words alone, but through her action, that Congress should not force taxpayers to subsidize NPR. What a great line. Very sarcastic. But bravo, he said. So again, I know celebrities are hesitant to weigh in on hot button issues. Hilarious right from the jump. So I appreciate Sheryl Crow making an argument here, not through words alone, but through her action, that Congress should not force taxpayers to subsidize NPR. Bravo. Yes, it should come from donations like Ms. Crow made with her Tesla. She then urged her followers to protect the Constitution and call a number which appears to be the phone number for dining options in the Senate building. According to the Senate's website, the phone number is one digit off from the U.S. Capitol switchboard, so there may have been a little bit of accident there on Sheryl Crow's part. Carr argued that Crow's donation seems like an argument against Congress requiring taxpayers to subsidize NPR. Wouldn't take too many celebrities following Sheryl Crow's lead and selling their cars to keep NPR going without taxpayers' dollars, he wrote in another post, following up and piggybacking off his first post. So seeing some pretty exciting things coming from FCC Chairman Brendan Carr, but that is an update from a story we brought to you yesterday. Okay, let's take a short break. Just getting started here. Keep those waves, keep those comments coming in, and we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. Let's go to some viewer comments. Good morning, Frank. Well, hey, good morning. I did a little math. The $300 billion that the U.S. sent to kill people in Ukraine would have given every homeless person in the United States $339,000. That could build some really nice homes. Yes, that could build some very nice homes. I'll take your word at it on the math. Comment from a different viewer. Good morning, Frank. I would really like to know how President Trump is bringing down airplanes. Is he an evil X-Men crashing them with his mind? It's the typical reaction to Trump on everything, isn't it? The media blames him for everything and, of course, gives him no credit. We're going to show you more examples of that coming from the media a little bit later on. First, I just wanted to get your opinion on this. I don't want to talk about this too much. I believe I first heard about this over the weekend. The steroid Olympics. Have you heard about this? The steroid Olympics has clinched a double-digit $1 million cash infusion from investors led by Don Trump Jr. as the controversial sporting event pursues an American debut. Getting the Trump name behind the enhanced game was a monumental effort, said Australian businessman Aaron D'Souza. This is now a very American project. Now, the first enhanced games will include events in track, swimming, weightlifting, combat, and gymnastics, and will likely take place later this year in a warm U.S. city conducive to winter months. We wouldn't have hosted the games in the United States if Biden was elected, he stated. Silicon Valley CEOs were, by and large, all Democrats until this election, and it was because of the Biden administration's deep antagonism towards innovation and technology that made them change their stance. Now, the goals of the game is to break world records by allowing athletes to dope up with almost any legally available performance-enhancing drug while paying them handsomely. The enhanced games will require medical screenings, including cardiac and brain imaging and heart rhythm monitoring, according to a website. The International Olympic Committee are legacy incumbents that have a giant multi-billion-dollar century-long monopoly, and they're afraid of competition, D'Souza said. The IOC has never had competition, and they're very threatened by us. D'Souza said he expects enhanced games to align better with the Trump administration, particularly with the new Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He has admitted to using testosterone replacement therapy in the past. That's all I know, folks. Just something that I found very interesting. While the games entice athletes to use drugs with hefty prizes, a $1 million bag for record breakers in track and swim events, and 5 or 6 figures upfront payment to participants. The Olympics similarly push dangerous substances, he said. All right, anyway. Came across my desk this morning, caught my interest, wanted to get your take on it. Okay. Oh, by the way, we didn't mention this yesterday. It just started yesterday, as a matter of fact. But the corrections officers who staged the strike, one of the prisons that this is happening at right now, Elmira, the other in Erie County. Corrections officers at 2 Western New York prisons. Well, okay, if you want to call us Western New York. This is from Brendan J. Lyons at Times-Union, saying that corrections officers went on strike on Monday in a, quote, unsanctioned work stoppage that has disrupted operations at the facilities, including visitations. The officers were holding signs that say strike and have set up burn barrels to stay warm outside Collins Correctional Facility in Erie County and Elmira Correctional Facility in Chemung County. They are protesting working conditions. Officials with the New York State Corrections Officers and Police Benevolent Association said the union did not sanction the strike. Much of this has to do with the HALT Act, which is, and we've talked about this extensively with Assemblyman Phil Palmisano in the past, where it has really, just much like we see when it comes to public safety in general, tying the hands of the officers while kind of coddling, if you will, the criminals. It has created quite a surge in attack on corrections officers in prisons and attacks on fellow inmates. So no longer can stand it, the unsafe working conditions, and they're protesting. I feel unfortunate for them that they picked such a cold week to do it outside. Officials with the State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision did not immediately comment on these strikes. The Times-Union reported earlier this month that some leaders for the labor union representing officers tried unsuccessfully to get their executive board to vote on a resolution calling for a statewide strike. The measure was rejected, and it did not make it to vote. And it's not just the HALT Act, though that plays a major decision in it, but it's also the hours they're being forced to work. We know that there's quite a need for corrections officers, but very often, hearing an interview yesterday or the day before, where you're talking sometimes 24, 30 hours of nonstop work, leading to unsafe conditions for the corrections officers. Officials with the State Corrections Agency said the incident began when an inmate was found attempting to discard contraband. They said one officer sustained a minor injury, but that the CERT team were able to retake control of each of the dorm areas later that afternoon. That's specifically in Collins Correctional Facility. There was a use of force which resulted in the recovery of 2 cell phones, the agency said. The other incarcerated individuals in his dorm became agitated and attempted to check on the incarcerated individual in possession of the phones, who was not injured. Later that morning, as a result of various potential threats, staff exited 3 dorms without incident. There were no hostages taken in any of the 3 dorms. But this is what led to it. I see no reference in here to HALT Act specifically, but I've heard numerous people state that is one of the reasons. Chris Summers, president of the union, said assaults on staff are occurring at historic levels. 100% increase in those incidents over the past 5 years. And again, we've had such lengthy discussions about this with Assemblyman Phil Palmisano. Last week, in response to questions from the Times-Union, the union said there were 13,229 corrections officers and 1,056 sergeants, which they said is down from 2 years ago by about 2,103 employees. During that same period, the number of inmates in custody has climbed more than 2,200. Union leaders said the situation has also led to corrections officers and other employees being forced to work long hours, including shifts up to 16 and even 24 hours. So if you have any inside information, I know we may be out protesting, but we have a big contingency of corrections officers that watch this program and used to listen on radio, and we thank you for that. We're always rooting for the job that you do, because it's very often a thankless job, and that's why we've had to so many times talk with Sheriff Schramm or Sheriff Allard or Phil or whoever would want to talk about it, the need for corrections officers and encourage corrections officers for all that they do. So that is a more local issue. When we come back, we are going to talk about Doge. We're going to read some of your comments. We have a lot to get, not a lot on New York State. We may get to that, but we have to get through as much as we can because, as I said, in the 7 o'clock hour, we're going to be talking with Jason Nickerson, president of John G. Ullman and Associates. We want to talk with him about, with a new president, a second term of Donald Trump, what we should know financially and about investing to get our money in order. So we'll be talking with him in the 7 o'clock hour. We'll be reading your comments. And we're going to be talking about everybody's favorite subject, Doge, when we come back. But I would love to hear your thoughts on the corrections officers and that strike. We're thinking about you out there. It's got to be very, very cold. I saw the burning barrels and I saw the big heaters. So your thoughts on that? There was something else I wanted to ask you a question to see your thoughts on, but I can't find it. So we'll get to that later on. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. We are going to get to Doge. I do want to talk a little bit about the media because it ties in, and I can tell people are already upset when they start to blame Trump for plane crashes that are happening in Canada. So I'm going to give you a couple updates on the media, which will actually tie in the Doge. But I know I kind of got you hooked on Doge talk. But let's go to some viewer comments. Super cold in a lot of Democrat states. Donald Trump strikes again. Well, wait till you see some of this media coverage. It's really, you're not that far off. So thank you. Good morning, Frank. Well, hey, good morning. Enhanced Olympic Games just doesn't seem very appealing. Merit-based sports, please. Just look at the shame of baseball with enhanced players involved. Thank you. That's a fair point. That's why it came kind of out of left field. I guess that's a pun. Did not expect that to be something supported by Don Jr. or just not on anybody's radar in general. That's not a criticism, just kind of fascinating. Comment from a different viewer. Good morning, Frank. Well, good morning. As far as the prison strikes, I don't blame them. The hours they put in are crazy, and they can't retaliate if attacked. I wouldn't want that job. Hats off to them. I couldn't agree more. When you look at the hours that they're asked to work, not really being able to make any plans any night, having the kind of the forced overtime. Then you have the HALT Act, which makes it nearly impossible. Well, you use the word retaliate, but even just to defend yourself, it puts them in harm's way. It was another one of these quote unquote public safety initiatives that Albany pushed that has done more damage than good, which has caused such a problem in our prisons and on the streets, as we've seen as well. So yes, it's a very difficult job, and I think that's a perfect way of putting it. Hats off to all of them. Okay, James Carville, the Raging Cajun, he was on MSNBC, and he was asked about Trump's agenda. He was asked about this, the spending and this waste and this fraud and all this cuts that Doge is involved in. He also kind of, it is Ari Melber, hinted towards the protests that we saw yesterday. They said nationwide. I know they showed some pictures from Washington, D.C. I know there was quite a crowd here in Corning. Well, James Carville said this is happening all around the country. So the question is, how should Democratic politicians respond to this? And what I think they should do is what we call in rural America, play possum. Just let it go. Don't get in the way of it. Or as we like to say, don't just stand there, do nothing. Let this germinate. We don't need to get in front of it. This freight train is moving. Let's just get out of the way, and then we're going to have time. So basically saying let Trump make the cuts, assuming that they're going to be bad. Now, they know that they can twist them, like we're seeing how they're trying to blame plane crashes on cuts at the FAA. So they know that they can start wording that message in a blame way. But what he's saying is let this continue to happen, assuming it's going to be a negative when I think it's resonating with the American people. Melber said Elon Musk was not elected. He was around in the final weeks of the campaign, but they certainly did not admit, or maybe they didn't know, that he would be a super almost co-president. Is that becoming a potential vulnerability for the Trump White House? Carville said, yeah, I think the slogan for 2026 is going to be a government of, by, and for billionaires. Is that really what you voted for? When this is coming up, get out of the way. Let it go. Let it go. This is a whole thing, and it's kind of happened. Everybody was like downbeat, depressed, and just happened quickly. I think I'm almost positive it's going to continue to happen. So that's James Carville. Just let it happen. Well, we're seeing the good work that Doge is doing. We're seeing these cuts and the findings of waste and potential, I should say, fraud. But I want to talk more about the media here to tie this in. So on President's Day, yesterday, the left-wing Salon magazine did a piece suggesting that President Donald Trump is an aspiring dictator and then likened him to both Nazi leader Adolf Hitler and Roman Emperor Augustus Caesar. Oh, and they also added for good measure that he is leading to the downfall of American democracy. Now, I know you're saying, Frank, this is so cliche. It is. The media, the comedians in media, they just call him basically orange and pick on his hair. And then you have those in the mainstream media, still left-wing, pushing the idea that he is some type of dictator in waiting. The Salon essay compares Trump to both Hitler and Augustus, arguing that he is destroying the 249-year-old constitutional republic while falsely presenting himself as its savior. The piece, penned by author Jim Sleeper, warns that Trump's promise to, quote, make America great again carries echoes of both the Nazi Reich and Roman Empire, citing Yale law professor Bruce Ackerman, who described Trump's presidency as a shattering assault on the foundations of the Constitution. Ooh, a little bit fancier wording than just a constitutional crisis that we hear used over and over again. The article asserts that Trump, like Augustus, provoked and won a chaotic decade-long power struggle, is now consolidating power in a way that mirrors the fall of Rome. At the same time, it argues that Trump's failed coup attempt of 2021 resembles Hitler's 1923 beer hall, I don't know how I say it, as it attempts to draw parallels between Trump's rhetoric and Nazi slogans. And this is common. This was very common in the first term, where they say that his rhetoric is very Hitler-esque, or his rhetoric is very dictatorial. So that was on none other than President's Day, where Salon compares Trump to Hitler and calls him an aspiring dictator. But it's not just Trump that got it. Vice President J.D. Vance wasn't safe from this line of attack, which is just prepare. I mean, this is going to be the line of attack every day. It's all they have. Representative Seth Moulton was on MSNBC Reports and suggested that Vice President J.D. Vance's Munich Security Conference address used, quote, some of the same language that Hitler used to justify the Holocaust. Imagine this. You give a speech where you are trying to protect free speech and encourage free speech, and somehow that is reminiscent of the language that Hitler used to justify the Holocaust. This is what Representative, yes, he is in the U.S. House of Representatives. He is a congressperson. He said, well, let me just talk about the mood in the room for that speech. It was one of absolute shock among our European allies, among basically everybody in the audience. I think many of us Americans just felt totally embarrassed as VP Vance delivered really not a speech, but a condescending lecture about the fundamental tenets of democracy to our European allies. And what was most remarkable is just how hypocritical this speech was. If there's anybody that should know a condescending lecture, it would be a Democrat, as we saw in the campaign season. He added, what's most dangerous about this is what one Republican advisor told me after the speech was that, a lot of us were talking about how it was embarrassing, how it was out of touch, how it was selling out the Ukrainians. But he said to me, Seth, if you listen carefully, it's actually much deeper and darker. He was talking about the enemy within. This is some of the same language that Hitler used to justify the Holocaust. Just after the speech, Vice President Vance went to the old Nazi Party headquarters in Munich to meet with the leader of the modern-day neo-Nazi party in Germany. A lot of rhetoric there, incendiary rhetoric, but also, again, tried and true. This is what they've been pushing, this kind of narrative. We saw on the Sunday shows. They try to push that narrative as well. On MSNBC, got to take another break. Let's go through. We got just a couple other quick media updates, and then we're going to get to Doge. I just had to mention these, not so much to get your blood boiling this morning, but just kind of show you, I think, or kind of put the nail into the coffin of the idea that they've learned their lesson after November. They may have started with the kind of soul searching that quickly faded, and now you have this kind of rhetoric, this kind of divisive rhetoric that just continues to create anger. I know Trump calls it Trump derangement syndrome, but it's now the trickle-down effect. J.D. Vance is getting it as well because we know that speech was very effective. We know that that's not what they're used to. They want kind of the generic vice presidential speech with not a lot of oomph. Instead, he gave really a remarkable speech, and if we have time on today's program, we're going to get into that speech a little bit more. If you saw it, I'd love to hear your take on it. But stay with us. We've got to take a short break. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. We are back with Frankly Speaking. Let's go to some viewer comments as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. Good morning, Frank. Oh, hey, good morning. The bottom line is, with respect to rich business owners, is that if they have money, they can expand their businesses, thereby creating jobs and therefore creating a larger tax base. This fact is something that the naysaying, simple-minded socialist Democrats just don't get. Thank you very much. Comment from a different viewer. Do you realize under German speech laws, currently, if you insult somebody, you can be arrested, especially if you do it online? People really are shocked when they learn about the German speech laws, and that's why it was so important for J.D. Vance to make that statement, and that's why the left seems to be so upset about it. We are going to talk about that speech. Hopefully, we'll have a moment to a little bit later on. But yes, do some research on the German speech laws, and it's shocking. Comment. So who supplies all the fancy signs for these protests? Has anybody asked? I would argue, let me play devil's advocate for a moment. I saw, if you're talking about the Corning one, I saw the anti-fascism President's Day rally, which seemed to be not so much about anti-fascism, but to be anti-Trump, anti-Musk. I saw the protests. Obviously, it was on Market Street. Good crowd. Can't take it away from them for how cold the weather was. But if you looked at their signs, they really weren't that fancy. Some of them were very difficult to read. Some were really nice, hand-drawn. I didn't see any that were, I shouldn't say none. I did see a few that looked produced, that they probably did get at a bigger rally at some point. But no, most of them were homemade. Some of them very difficult to actually read. That's not to knock on them, but sometimes you forget that you don't need to have a whole chapter of a book on your sign. You want to get short and to the point. Comment from a different viewer. Frank, is there any way you can get someone from the city of Elmira to explain why the parking garage is still in deplorable and unsafe conditions? My wife and I would love to attend a hockey game, but will not until this problem is addressed. This also ties in with the homelessness problem mentioned yesterday. Thank you very much. I will do my best to get somebody on the program soon to discuss that, because if that's stopping you from going to a hockey game, I'm sure they want to address it. Thank you very much for that comment. Going back to the media, having not learned their lesson, Nicole Wallace on Deadline on MSNBC said that President Donald Trump had dropped any and all pretenses of wanting to be president and was instead attempting to be an emperor. If it's an emperor Republicans want this President's Day, maybe it's about time they just say that and drop any and all pretenses, because Donald Trump sure has. Trump's first chief of staff there in his first term, Reince Priebus, dismissing what Jamal Bowie of New York Times calls the single most un-American and anti-constitutional statement ever uttered by an American president. Trump this weekend posting a quote on social media, often attributed to Napoleon, and it reads, "He who saves his country does not violate the law." Perhaps more alarming than the interruption of presidential power and its unlimited scope is that the Supreme Court, in its ruling on presidential immunity last summer, has already kind of sort of agreed with the Napoleon and Trump. So it's with a keen eye that we are watching the Supreme Court this week as it begins the process of further clarifying what presidential power means in this country right now in the very first case to reach the Supreme Court, arising from Donald Trump's flurry of executive actions these past few weeks. The justices will again shape the scope of presidential power in a case to do with who Trump can fire and who he cannot fire. So attempting to be an emperor, I'm not sure how to pronounce this guy's name, but I'm going to try. He was on MSNBC's Dateline as well. His name's Frank. That part I can get. Figlazui? My apologies. He said, he's a former FBI assistant director. He said, if you voted for Trump, you, quote, need to question whether you're American anymore. With regard to this statement, this is a quote that Trump made that's normally attributed to Napoleon. When he says, don't worry that someone who saves a country cannot violate a law, it's been interpreted by some historians who aren't certain to Napoleon, but I'll tell you where. It's definitely been used far more recently. That's with a white supremacist, far-right extremist named Anders Breivik in Norway, who killed 77 people in Norway. Now our president is quoting that white supremacist, neo-Nazi murderer. If you voted for that, you really need to question whether you're American anymore. But that's who's using that kind of statement. Listen, does Donald Trump sit and read Norwegian history? No. Someone is handing him this story, this quote. We need to figure out who keeps spoon-feeding him the white supremacy, white terrorist philosophy. So a quote that's normally attributed to Napoleon, but because somebody in Norway who killed 77 people used it centuries later, it's no longer Napoleon's. That Trump must have been quoting that white supremacist. You see where the line of reasoning goes in the media. And now we've heard so much about President Musk. I saw a couple signs saying that yesterday, and Musk was not elected. They're trying to get under Trump's skin, of course, by calling him the real president, that it's actually Elon Musk that's president, not Donald Trump. You've seen it played out time and time again in the media. Now they're trying to suggest Marco Rubio's not even in the State Department. It's not even Marco Rubio's State Department. It's becoming increasingly clear that Marco Rubio is Secretary of State in name only. According to Politico, which we found out because of Doge, was receiving a lot of taxpayers' dollars. I will say, this is really so hack. It's so trite. Since taking over Foggy Bottom, Rubio has constantly appeared one or two steps behind the actions of President Trump and tech mogul Elon Musk, popping up to explain, justify, or even double down on choices he probably would not make if he was actually running the show. He's talking in a different voice, contradicting earlier policy views, and appears to have little control over the implementation of Trump's assault on the federal workforce. Democrats who backed Rubio for Secretary of State, hoping he'd be a more moderating force in the administration, says they increasingly worry Rubio does not have the president's ear and almost no sway over Musk. How many Democrats supported him? Oh, they're saying for the confirmation. Chris Murphy said a simple story is that Rubio is not in charge, but in order to maintain the appearance that he's in charge, he has to defend the decisions other people are making. Who is the real Secretary of State then? Elon Musk. So now we know that Elon Musk is president, vice president, and now Secretary of State. Interesting. I wonder what title he'll receive next. Well, actually, I mean, Secretary of State would be a step down from president. But in all of this, they've been forced to admit that MAGA and Trump running circles around them. This coming from, again, far-left Politico, lamenting, quote, in the early days of Trump's second term, Democrats are getting swamped. Interesting choice of words there, by the way. The rapid response account the DNC started in January is a fifth of the size of Rapid Response 47, the Trump White House account. Hakeem Jeffries, the House Minority Leader, has almost 1 million followers, but Musk, who has posted hundreds of times over the last month, has more than 217 million followers. Some Democrat groups like MoveOn.org and Human Rights Campaign are posting far less on X, if not leaving the site completely for Blue Sky, a left-leaning version of X with far fewer users and nowhere the same audience reach. Conservative personalities hold 5 of the top 10 podcasts on Spotify, while for liberals, only the New York Times columnist Ezra Klein cracks that list. Some Democrats can see that they are losing an asymmetrical battle with the president and his MAGA allies, where Trump and Musk have dominated online spaces over the last month, and there's no consensus among them about how to fix their rapid response problem or who's to blame. I don't know how fixable that problem is right now, said one left-wing researcher telling Politico. So there's your media updates. When we come back, we're going to be talking about Doge. Read some of your comments. Keep them coming in. Almost ready to wrap up hour number 1. Where is the time going? Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Give them a call today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street In Corning, a couple comments from viewers regarding the criticism of the Supreme Court. What's next? Will those Democrats be saying that the justices that comprise the Supreme Court are anti-democracy? Yeah. I mean, there's no love lost between Democrats and the Supreme Court. Now, they used to love the Supreme Court because they could get through very unpopular laws through the court using the judicial system. Now, because of the way the cards are played, Donald Trump got all those picks. It's now more what they deem a conservative court, even though a conservative justice is more likely to go against a conservative belief than a Democrat is going against a Democrat belief. But having said that, yeah, there'll be a lot of criticism of the Supreme Court depending on what kind of decisions they make. Coming from a different viewer, this is Mark. Hey, Mark. The Dems are going crazy. They have had their power cut, kickbacks cut, and also they are making up lies like crazy. Maybe they should take heed at what Trump is doing if they want to get elected again. I think that's why some have been quiet. Some have even shown support in some instances, not full-throated support, we'll say that. But for certain things, because they saw what some did, what the landslide election meant in November. Now, Doge discovered $4.7 trillion in Treasury payments that were missing a critical code, meaning traceability was almost impossible. Doge announced yesterday evening, that some 4.7 trillion, folks, I'm not talking billions or millions like we've been talking about the last few days, $4.7 trillion in payments from the Treasury Department were missing a critical tracking code, which made tracing the transactions, quote, almost impossible. The transactions were reportedly missing the Treasury account symbol, or TAS, an identification code which links a Treasury payment to a budget line item. They described the use of the code as a standard financial process. In the federal government, the TAS field was optional for $4.7 trillion in payments and was often left blank, making traceability almost impossible. The tweet read, the Elon Musk-led project to curb waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government said in light of the discovery, use of the TAS code is now mandatory. As of Saturday, this is now a required field, increasing insight into where money is actually going, and thanking the Treasury Department for its great work implementing the change. Musk touted the change as a major improvement in Treasury payment integrity. This was a combined effort of Doge, Treasury, and the Federal Reserve. Nice work by all. Now, the Treasury Department, which facilitates trillions of dollars worth of government payments every year, was one of the first agencies Doge embedded itself in after Trump's inauguration. So $4.7 trillion, and you can think of how there could be some errors there. There could be, I don't think there's any suggestion of misdeeds, but the conversation needed to be had. Elon Musk also cried fraud on $20 million, or 20 million, in Social Security database that are over 100 years old. Tesla and ex-CEO Elon Musk, head of Doge, claimed to uncover the biggest fraud in history when he stumbled across more than 20 million people listed in the Social Security database as over the age of 100 years old. Quote, according to the Social Security database, there are the numbers of people in each age bucket with a death field set to false, showing a chart of ages ranging from 0 to 369 years old. Maybe Twilight is real and there are a lot of vampires collecting Social Security, he joked, adding that there are far more eligible Social Security numbers than there are citizens in the USA. This might be the biggest fraud in history. However, this bombshell has long been known by the Social Security Administration, which released an audit back in July of 23 showing that 18.9 million people listed as 100 years or older but not dead were in the database. Only 86,000 people living in the U.S. at the time were actually over 100 years old, according to the Census Bureau. The same Inspector General's office found in March 2015 audit that 16.5 million people with Social Security numbers but no death information were over 112 years old, despite just 35 people on the planet having reached that ripe old age. In both audits, the Inspector General concluded that almost none were actually cashing Social Security checks, despite the glaring accounting error, identifying people born in 1886 and 1893 as still living, in two extreme examples. Roughly 18.4 million uncovered in the 2023 audit had not received benefits or reported income for 50 years, meaning they were likely dead. We believe it likely that the Social Security Administration did not receive or record most of the 18.9 million individuals' death information, primarily because the individuals died decades ago before the use of electronic death reporter. Around 44,000 were actually receiving benefits, with 13 of those older than 112. So it's just very few. Only 44,000 actually receiving benefits. That's supposed to be taken as a comfort and I guess looked at as some negative against Elon Musk trying to root out what he calls this fraud. You may have heard yesterday that the acting head of the Social Security Administration has resigned after a dispute with Doge. We're going to talk about that when we come back. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security and Horseheads. Contact Boss Security today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we are broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio, wrapping up hour number one. The Social Security Administration's acting commissioner reportedly resigned over the weekend after a dispute with Doge over access to sensitive government records. Michelle King, a career federal worker who had been with SSA since 1994, quit over the Doge disagreement Saturday and was replaced by Leland Dudick. The Washington Post reported this yesterday. Dudick has been supportive of Doge's efforts to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government and will serve as acting commissioner of SSA until President Trump's pick to lead the agency. Frank Bisgano is confirmed by the Senate, according to the outlet. Doge staffers embedded at SSA reportedly sought access to sensitive files in the same manner that they have at other federal agencies, such as the Treasury Department, since Trump established the cost-cutting initiative. All right. Our number one is in the books. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to be talking with Jason Nickerson. He is the president of John G. Ullman and Associates. We'll be talking with him right around 7:10. Also on Thursday's program, we're going to be talking to former congressman, current assemblyman, also the chair of the Steuben County Republican Committee, Joe Sempolinski. He's going to join us Thursday. Petition season is about to begin, so we'll find out a little bit about that. If you have any questions for the former congressman, current assemblyman, his title just keeps getting longer. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach that number at the bottom of the screen. I'd love to hear from you, and we'll try our best to get to as many of those questions as we possibly can. Okay. Let's wrap up hour number one here. Coming up, we got some other guests coming up next week. I don't want to get through all of those quite yet and give away all of our guests until they're officially set in stone. So we'll hold off on that. But I do want to wrap up hour number one here. If you have any questions, I do have a couple comments that I didn't get a chance to get to because I ran out of the room for a moment. We'll get to those at the top of the hour. We've got a few things here about Doge, a little bit more about J.D. Vance's speech. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I'd also love to know your thoughts on the strike going on in Elmira right now with the corrections officers. We wish them the best in this very cold weather. Hear your thoughts on that. One other quick thing, because I'm not going to have time to dive into this. But Tom Cotton has a new book out about how the Chinese Communist Party has conquered Hollywood since the 1990s. There's a section of that book from Tom Cotton at the New York Post this morning. If that's something that interests you, we've talked in the past numerous times about if Hollywood wants to have their movie play in China, sometimes they're told to cut certain things. He goes into depth on this. The book, 7 Things You Can't Say About China, that's by Tom Cotton, and that is out now. All right, we're out of time. Hour number one in the books. Hour number two, mere moments away. Stay with us. This is Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV. Big Fox, we will be right back. Hour number two of Frankly Speaking, broadcasting live from the Hesselson studio here on Marcus Street in Corning. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Let's go through some viewer comments. As I mentioned, coming up in about 10 minutes, we'll be talking with Jason Nickerson. He is the president of John G. Ullman and Associates, so make sure that you stay tuned for that. First up, good morning, Frank. Well, good morning. I like to visit Doge.gov to see all of the waste and abuse that isn't mentioned by the media. Everyone that bashes Musk must be in favor of the $10 million that went for Mozambique voluntary medical male circumcision. Interesting. Thank you. I'm glad you refreshed our memory on that. I know we talked about it when it first popped up. I think it was on Valentine's Day when Doge.gov first went online, and I haven't had an opportunity to go on yet. I was just checking it during the break. It's pretty interesting. So thank you for reminding us on that. Comment from a different viewer. I can't wait till Musk finds out that people like Nancy Pelosi and other politicians have been receiving ill-gotten gains. It'll be interesting if that unfolds. Thank you very much. Comment from a different viewer. It would be an extraordinary sign of goodwill for you to invite an articulate protester to tell us calmly and coherently what exactly they don't like about what has happened in the last month that they are protesting. I just don't get it. Criminal aliens being deported, loyal Democrat voters losing their six-figure government jobs, DEI bullies having to make an honest living, calling out allies that are slouching towards authoritarianism. I'm generally curious. All I get is don't like the way things are going, or world's richest man wants your social security number, which I don't understand why. I mean, he can't really want my social security. But anyway, I probably won't do that. Not the best programming, but I would be more than happy to read comments from viewers that happened to go to yesterday's protest, or one of the many protests they've had against Trump and against Musk. More than happy to read the comments, but probably kind of difficult to pull that off as an interview. But thank you for the suggestion. Always appreciate those suggestions. But yes, feel free to reach out anytime. We'll read it, your statement, with respect. Okay, Elon Musk's Doge, speaking of DEI, puts DEI on the chopping block, which with the termination of over $370 million in education department grants. This was announced yesterday. The grants totaled $373 million. One grant was reportedly funding training for teachers to engage in ongoing learning and self-reflection to confront their own biases and racism and develop asset-based anti-racist mindsets. Over the past several weeks, Doge has announced the canceling of various streams of funding to DEI in education, including $9.7 million for UC Berkeley to develop a cohort of Cambodian youth with enterprise-driven skills. The latest spending sweep comes just days after Doge announced the termination of another 89 DOE contracts totaling $881 million, which included more than $100 million in DEI grants. And now we're learning that the U.S. Department of Education announced yesterday that it was terminating $600 million in grants for teacher training programs, including dismantling racial bias and centering equity in the classroom. The canceled grants went to institutions and nonprofits that use taxpayer funds to train teachers and education agencies' divisive ideologies, according to the department. Some of the training materials were on far-left topics like critical race theory, DEI, social justice activism, anti-racism, and instruction on white privilege and white supremacy. All right. Yeah, we're going through a lot of things quickly this morning because we do have a special guest coming up in just a little bit. Now, the Trump administration is trying to now bring back the fired nuclear weapons workers in the Doge reversal. The Trump administration has halted the firing of hundreds of federal employees who were tasked with working on the nation's nuclear weapons program in an about-face that has left workers confused, and experts caution that Doge's blind cost-cutting will put communities at risk. 3 U.S. officials who spoke to the Associated Press said up to 350 employees at the National Nuclear Security Administration were abruptly laid off Tuesday, with some losing access to emails before they learned they were fired, only to try to enter their offices on Friday morning to find they were locked out. The official spoke on the condition of anonymity for fear of retaliation. One of the hardest hit offices was the Pantex plant near Amarillo, Texas, which saw about 30% of the cuts. Those employees work on reassembling warheads, one of the most sensitive jobs across the nuclear weapons enterprise with the highest level of clearance. The hundreds let go at NNSA were part of a Doge purge across the Department of Energy and targeted about 2,000 employees. Daryl Kimball, executive director of the Arms Control Association, said the Doge people are coming in with absolutely no knowledge of what these departments are responsible for. They don't seem to realize that this is actually the Department of Nuclear Weapons more than it is the Department of Energy. By late Friday, the agency's acting director, Teresa Robbins, issued a memo rescinding the firings for all but 28 of those hundreds of fired staff members. This letter serves as formal notification that the termination decision issued to you on February 13th has been rescinded effective immediately. The accounts from 3 officials contradict an official statement from the Department of Energy, which said fewer than 50 National Nuclear Security Administration staffers were let go, calling them probationary employees. So that is a reversal. We're giving you all the information on Doge, and I know a viewer mentioned this yesterday. and I didn't know the specifics of it, so I appreciate it. We are going to get to your comments. So we're going to have a guest at 7:10. We're going to be talking with Jason Nickerson, but make sure that you keep those comments coming in because I see a ton of them. And when we're done with our interview, I'll make sure to read comments and play a little catch up. So I do appreciate it. But a viewer mentioned this yesterday, and I kind of glanced over it, and now I'm finding out more that DC house prices have been slashed because Doge has been targeting those federal workers. As of Monday early morning, there were a total of 2,400 homes listed for sale on Zillow in Washington, D.C., 250 of which have been put on the market in the last 7 days and 461 in the last 14 days. More than half the homes currently listed for sale on the real estate platform, 1,489, have been added in the past 90 days. Some homeowners in Washington, D.C. are not only apparently rushing to sell their properties in the city, but they're also willing to slash prices to attract reluctant buyers. Of the 2,400 homes currently listed for sale, 426 have seen a price reduction. They give specifics on some of them. But financial social media profile Wall Street Mav wrote on Twitter, the Washington, D.C. housing market is being affected by the layoffs in the federal government. Now imagine what happens to the rental market and housing market in the USA when 10 to 20 million illegal aliens are deported. Rents and housing prices become affordable again. Real estate analyst Lance Lambert wrote, I've already received a few messages from local agents about the cooling effect that Doge and federal spending cuts are having on DC's housing market. Anecdotal noise or material impact, we will have to wait and see. So that is another, I guess you could say, I don't know, I don't want to say consequence, but that is something else coming from Doge that maybe not as expected, but that ties in with a really, well, we don't have time to get to it. We do have a few things here on international issues later on in the program. We've got a couple of New York State updates. Do you think Eric Adams lasts? I know Governor Hochul is meeting with some leaders to have the discussion about Eric Adams. Now, keep in mind, she can replace him. The governor of New York State, there is not a recall scenario in New York State. There is a scenario where the governor can oust an elected leader or replace an elected leader. Do you think that's or calling for him to be ousted? She is assembling key leaders to discuss a path forward regarding Eric Adams. People were calling at a protest yesterday for her to dump Eric Adams. Your thoughts, will he make it? I know that's more of a city issue, but worth mentioning. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the strike going on at Elmira Correctional Facility. We talked about it a little bit earlier this morning. Obviously, they're braving the cold to really fight for their safety, fight for not just their mental health. When you look at the hours that they're receiving, they're being forced to work, but also when you talk about the HALT Act and putting their lives in jeopardy. And we'll have to have somebody, Phil Palmisano, who's been a very outspoken critic of HALT. We'll have to have him on again the program soon to discuss this issue specifically, to give you some of the numbers, because they are very disturbing when you look at not just prisoners on corrections officers, the violence there, but also the numbers when it comes to the prisoners, got distracted on something in the background, prisoners on prisoner violence as well. So we'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But we've got to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be talking with Jason Nickerson from John G. Ullman and Associates. That's up after this quick commercial break. Keep those comments coming in. If you're new to the program, you see the number on the bottom of the screen. I would love to hear from you. You can also send in questions for Thursday's interview with former Congressman and current Assemblyman Joe Sempolinski, who will be joining us for the 7 o'clock hour on Thursday. So if you have any questions about federal issues, state issues, or if you want to run for office, because he is the Steuben County Republican chair, I'm sure he would love your questions on that as well. Stay with us. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking after this. Oh, there we go. Got the wrong break there. We'll be right back. Stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. I'm your host, Frank Acom. We're broadcasting from the Hesselson's studio. Thank you so much to our guests for being in the studio this morning.
I'm happy to be here, Frank. Good to join you.
Well, we've got a lot of questions. We talk about the news, of course, every day on the program. So as we look at the new presidential administration under Donald Trump, what are some of the key economic policies you expect to take center stage? Can you guess that?
Yeah. Well, I think, if you're paying attention sort of pre-election and even through now, Trump's message has been pretty consistent, whether you agree with it or not. I think there's some big themes developing out of this, really kind of in three areas, right? He's talked about tariffs, he's talked about reduction of income taxes, and he's talked about sort of economic stimulus in a number of different ways. The question is if and when that really kind of comes down to the everyday person in this country. But it has been somewhat consistent. Some of the things that we kind of have been looking at from the very beginning is right down to the individual level, because that's who we're dealing with, right, as advisors, right? How does this impact us? One of the things that we focused in on was Trump had put in place some tax rules, laws in his first administration that are set to expire at the end of this year.
Okay.
And now with that he is in office, the expectation is that those will get extended. And there's a few things in there that are pretty important, small businesses and to individuals. Just to highlight a couple of the things. Small businesses, you're looking at a qualified business income deduction, you're looking at bonus depreciation, and we would expect those to get extended, and those are very supportive to small businesses. Tax rates are set to go higher, if not extended. We would expect the current tax rates to get extended. The estate tax exemption, federal estate tax exemption, sits at about $13 million, a huge dollar amount, which basically eliminates a lot of estates from taxation, and we would expect that to get extended as well. So a lot of that can be very stimulative, right down to the individual level.
Okay.
There is a few things in there that that he put in place that were actually not tax reductions, but kind of turned out to be increase in taxes overall. And one of them in particular that's being talked about as being eliminated is what's called the SALT deduction, SALT. So that's your state and local income taxes. Right. What they were trying to do was simplify the income tax return for the individual by increasing the standard deduction, right? And that knocked a lot of people out of itemizing deductions at the federal level. But then what we found out was that at the state level, you still had to do that accounting. So it didn't really simplify anything in some ways. Now we have this $10,000 cap on the amount of taxes we can deduct on our federal tax return if we're in itemized deductions, and there is talk about eliminating that. So that would be another positive potentially. But I guess overall, it sounds as though we're trying to generate economic activity, and there are good and bad outcomes to that, right? Everyone wants, a growing economy and more money in their pockets and things like that. But what we have to really kind of be careful of is what is the ultimate outcome, because we have kind of seen that in the past where an overstimulated economy can actually be a negative in some ways.
Well, that is interesting. This is a unique position because you can also study what the 4 years look like under Trump. This is unique. We've never seen anything quite like that. But when you've done historically, when you look at presidential administrations, it doesn't matter the party, how has it impacted the economy and markets in the short and then the long term?
Well, that's a great question because it was one that I kind of asked myself as we were leading up to this election, which was how has the stock market performed under different presidential elections? What I found was Deutsche Bank actually studied this in detail. Two research analysts went all the way back to 1901. They used the S&P 500 as their benchmark to study stock market performance. And there were three presidents, and only three, that had negative stock market performance. It was Hoover, Nixon, and then George W. Bush was the most recent. Now, if we just take that, because most of the viewers are going to remember the Bush presidency, which was 8 years, and there were two major market events that contributed to negative stock market performance. One was known as the dot-com bubble at the turn of the century, and one was known as the Great Recession from around the end of 2007 to the end of 2009. So one could say that the president really doesn't impact market performance, and it's more event-driven. But on the other hand, again, I like to debate with myself and say that there are certain things that a president or an administration can do that can push a market event in a positive or negative way.
Now, if you look at the past 4 years under the Biden administration as compared to the Trump years coming forward, what are you looking at in those two differences in kind of economic policies?
Well, it's a very interesting period of time to study, actually, because we've had some extreme volatility in a number of different areas, right? And I would go back to 2020 and start with the COVID era pandemic. And what I want viewers to kind of envision, and you, Frank, to envision real quick is, imagine I'm holding a bucket of water and I shake it profusely, right? The water's going to splash around and spill out, right? That's what essentially hit the economy, was a massive amount of shakeup and volatility because we shut down the economy due to a pandemic. And we had to stimulate it, though, right, to kind of keep it up and running. And how do we do that? Well, we put a lot of money in people's pockets. They needed money. They weren't working. We reduced rates to very, very low levels, which allowed, especially in our economy where it's sort of like this borrow and spend economy, to borrow capital at a very low rate and then go out and spend it. That stimulates an economy. And what we saw coming out of that in 2022 was massive amounts of inflation coming, right? Because now the economy's opened back up, people are back to work. Now they're not only spending stimulus dollars, essential stimulus dollars, as well as their own money now that they're earning again. So it's a lot of money chasing the same amount of goods and services, right? The Federal Reserve had to step in and act, and how do they do that? Well, they raise rates to kind of slow the economy back down. And then we turn the corner and the economy's starting to slow down, and now they start lowering rates again. And now we're kind of at this pause moment. So take that bucket of water, 2020, 2021, I shake it up and water spilling everywhere. And then we get to say 23 and 24, we set the bucket down and the water's trying to find equilibrium. So again, is it really about presidential policy? Yeah, I mean, there's certainly some impact, but we're still feeling the effects coming out of the pandemic era and looking for some equilibrium, if you will.
Interesting. So you've seen market volatility around past presidential transitions. What trends should people look for with the Trump transition?
Well, I think volatility is created by unknowns and big, bold statements. And we're certainly seeing that right now, right?
Yeah, sure.
Coming into the election, there was certainly a lot of unknown as to who was going to be our next president. Of course. And so we saw a lot of volatility. And actually, if you study the market the days following the election, we actually had some nice market upticks, And that was because we knew who the president was. It wasn't saying it was because Trump was going to be good or bad for the market, right? It just was. We knew who he was. And like you said, I mean, we had already seen his presidency before. Now we're getting into this position where there's these big, bold statements coming out of the federal government, and we're now seeing more volatility again. If we just rewind a couple of weeks when Trump announced the first set of tariffs on Mexico,
it's only been a couple of weeks.
It's been only a couple of weeks. It feels like it's been months, right? He announced these tariffs over the weekend, and markets gapped down on Monday. So, and then we've since recovered. And so there will be another set of announcements. And until we kind of find this like level playing ground of, okay, we're putting things in place and we're going to watch and see kind of the outcome of these things, I do expect a lot of volatility kind of in the early stages here.
Well, how much of the market's reaction to the Trump administration is based on maybe policy versus investor sentiment and speculation?
I would say a lot of it right now is emotional, just opinion. And there is a lot going on. We have a new administration. We have a Federal Reserve that is kind of at a pause right now in terms of their policy of raising rates or lowering rates. We also right now we're sitting in a period of 2 weeks where there are a lot of earnings announcements coming from companies. So we've just got this bucket of stuff that we're trying to sift through, and it is going to create a lot of volatility just on its own, right? But we're in a very emotional stage right now. I would say, more so than any other administration change I've ever seen. I don't know how you feel about that, but it feels like there's a lot of, there's a big divide between the two sides. And so I think we're not at the fundamental stage of what the policy outcomes and economic impact will be. It's very emotional still right now.
And that's very interesting you say that, because you point to the weekend announcements. There's so many news stories every single day. Now we don't even have weekends off.
That's right.
It makes the show very easy, let me tell you. So what potential shifts in tax policy, deregulation, and spending, what do you think investors should consider in their portfolios?
Well, like I said, we're dealing down at the very personal level. We're not political,
right?
And we don't know what the actual impact is going to be of these things, because, like I said, we saw tariffs implemented and then we saw tariffs paused, right? So we have to deal with kind of what we have in front of us. So it's really a good question. It makes me reflect on a recent article I was reading where the title was, "We wish we had listened to our advisor." And of course, it's going to pique my interest being an advisor, right? Is you have clients who we have great relationships with our clients and very strong partnerships. So there is a lot of give and take. But this particular couple in this article was explaining how their advisor had recommended that they take this pile of cash that they had developed and not pay off their mortgage and invest the money instead to enhance their retirement savings and so on. And they did not follow that advice. They actually paid off their mortgage. Now, depending on what side you sit on, right? There's pundits, experts, and so on that feel, eliminate all debt as soon as you can. And there's some that say use good debt to enhance savings and investments, right? I actually paid attention probably to a part of the article that I wasn't really supposed to. It was, what did they do with the extra money on a monthly basis? They paid off their mortgage. And they talked about how they enhanced their life out of it. They went to more expensive restaurants and they bought more things. Okay, so this is where the part of what's kind of coming out that I get concerned with, right, is because I think in this country you hear, there's roughly $1 trillion in credit card debt sitting out there. The last administration was trying to help student loan borrowers, right, by providing some relief. It's what does the individual actually do with that extra money if there's policies put in place that lower taxes or have them find extra cash flow.
Right.
My concern is that it's not used in a disciplined way, and this is just my brain as an advisor, right?
Sure.
Is that it's used to enhance lifestyle instead of enhance future lifestyle. It's enhancing now versus future, right? Where if the everyday individual using that extra cash flow to enhance their retirement savings, pay off debt, especially debt that is not good debt, right? And using it to enhance what could their goals and objectives in their financial plan. There's nothing really in place to help us do that. So it's a concern. I mean, it seems like a good opportunity, but it is a concern. Is do we have this opportunity to really kind of improve our own personal financial status?
Do you see a big uptick in phone calls when there's a new president asking you questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Is there always kind of a concern around it?
There's a lot of there's concern, and then there is also what can we do to capture, right? So there's two sides. What I would suggest to people, and I've had clients call and say, I'm very, very concerned about what this president's going to do, and it's not just with Trump; it's been past presidents too. It's listen. If there is a high level of concern, the first thing you should do is review whatever the plan is, okay, and make a change, because you're not going to sleep at night until you kind of take an action,
right?
Okay. My job as the advisor is to make sure you don't go too overboard, right? It's like kind of bring balance to the conversation, regardless of which side you sit on. But if you do have this fear that there's a severe market correction coming because of a president, it might be because you're too overextended in risk anyway. And so you should really think about, go back and revisit some of the things that are very, very personal and individual to you, right? You need to revisit diversification, not just in your investments, but your overall plan. Diversification applies to more than just your investment portfolio.
Right.
You should revisit your balance, and that is also not just to your investment portfolio, that's your overall plan, not going too far down one strategy to where it's going to cost you a lot to back out of it. And what is your overall timeline, right? So people who are nervous about where their money is invested, maybe they're too far invested into one strategy or one area, and they need to find balance. They need to find diversification. But also the timeline's important, right? If you've invested cash that you think you're going to need in the next 2 or 3 years, you're probably overextended in your investments, and we would say you need to start looking at sort of more conservative vehicles for something like that.
How might Trump's fiscal policies, such as the tax cuts that we talked about, infrastructure spending, tariffs, those type of things, how do they affect the overall economic growth?
Well, it depends on how it's used, right? Because what is being talked about in reduction of spending and tariffs that are supposed to be beneficial to our country, or lower taxes, it really depends on what it's used for.
Sure.
If those things are used to benefit our country, to improve our infrastructure, which is sorely needed, roads, bridges, highways, the power grid, things like that, then we're going to start to see improvements in our country and overall economy, because those investments are going back into our country. What you can't have, and what I would say is you can't have a continuation of what we've seen in this country. It's something that's concerned us overall long term. Is we're continuing to run a budget deficit. We are continuing to add to our nation's debt, and while I don't believe that all debt is bad debt.
Sure.
There is a point where we've got to fix something, right?
Because
someone's got to pay that back. And we talk about, every president for a long, long time has said, here, we have to make improvements to our financial status in our country.
Right.
And it could be our nation's debt, it could be our budget, it could be even programs like Social Security and Medicare. And our thought and belief was that those were going to be very, very hard decisions to make, right? Like, how are you going to do that? Well, you either raise revenue or cut costs.
Yeah.
And we're kind of seeing some of that on one side right now through a lot of cost cutting. But as long as it's put back into improvement of the overall country, what we should see are programs getting healthier, like Social Security and Medicare. We should see more opportunities for small business owners and entrepreneurs to build things, right? We should see opportunities for just everyday Americans to improve their own financial status, not mirror it after how the country's been run, but improve ourselves and pay off our own bad debt and invest in our future and our kids' future and so on.
We'd be in some big trouble if we spent like that. What impact do you foresee on inflation and interest rates under the Trump administration?
Those are two big words, right?
Yeah,
that we've
right.
talked about for a long, long time, and they're inextricably linked, I think. But for the viewers, maybe a little education would help, right? Why are these two things linked? Well, not all inflation's bad inflation, right? I mean, we need some, and what that is a signal of is a growing economy when there's some inflation. Too much inflation, like I said, coming through 2022, overstimulation, that causes prices to get out of control, and we as consumers just can't afford. Our wages won't keep up. To be able to buy the things we need to buy. On the other hand, interest rates are used as a control. It makes when rates are higher, it makes cost of capital more expensive, right? So think about it as someone who wants to go buy a home. There is gridlock in the real estate market right now. Why is that? Well, because during the COVID era, rates were reduced to low levels that you and I will probably never see.
I know,
right?
I missed that opportunity.
And if you didn't buy a home or you didn't refinance your home, you're probably thinking I missed an opportunity. But if you did, think about now. People with 3% on average mortgage rates, they're not necessarily wanting to sell a home because most people who are looking to sell a home, they're probably looking to upgrade, right?
Right.
So they look to upgrade, and that's going to cost more money. But it's also going to cost more money because rates are higher, right?
Right.
So they're not willing to sell because it's going to cost them double, right? There's two catalysts there for it to cost more. You have first-time home buyers who are looking at mortgage rates saying, I can't afford that right now, or I can't afford the home I want or whatnot. So there is some gridlock in some areas, and if interest rates are lowered, more people are thinking, well, I can afford a house now. Well, home ownership has been a big focus across a lot of administrations because think of the ripple effect that causes through the economy. Of course. I go buy a new home, I'm going to buy new appliances, I'm going to buy new furniture, I'm going to buy new things, right? So there is this ripple effect that goes beyond just buying a home. So if interest rates are higher, it creates gridlock, cost of capital is more. Of course. If interest rates are lowered, there's more money. It's cheaper money. And it's chasing the same amount of goods. Okay. So think about it as a person who might want to buy a home. I'm sitting back waiting for mortgage rates to drop. Right. So isn't everybody else. Yeah, right. And those homes that I was looking at currently, they're only going to get more valuable, and so I'm going to have to spend up even more than I would now. So that is sort of in a microcosm, like that's the impact of inflation and interest rates. And what has come out of this administration is they think interest rates are too high in a lot of ways. In some ways, I think maybe they're not high enough. Like one thing I heard recently is wanting to cap credit card interest rates. Yeah. I'm a little counterintuitive in this. Is like credit cards as an advisors, we're looking to eliminate the use of credit card debt. From a debt standpoint and spending standpoint, I want to see credit card rates higher. I want to deter people from using credit cards, and force people to look at ways to create a cash flow positive and use that instead of using credit cards as an extension of income, so to speak. So that's how these two things work, right? Lower interest rates, more money flowing, causes inflation. We got to raise rates, shut that down, and so on. And right now, it seems to be that we want to lower rates, and I think it can be good in some areas. It might remove some of the gridlock in real estate, but it can cause there's a cause and effect to everything.
For everything. What lessons can investors take from past presidential transitions when it comes to their long-term financial planning?
One, don't take lessons from the federal government.
Yes, that's always our number one here.
Because if Frank, if you and I ran a company like the federal government runs, we'd be fired in a minute. Oh, right?
There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt.
And so I would say don't take lessons from the federal government, but look to be more disciplined in your approach. Sure. Bring in some of the core characteristics of just good financial operation, like good financial health. I mentioned some already, right, is diversification. It doesn't just apply to investments. Right. We talk about tax diversification, right? We talk about diversifying plans. We talk about balance a lot, right? And the reason we talk about those things is because outcomes can be influenced by things out of our control. If we get too far down one path and something changes that negatively impacts that path, if it costs us a lot to switch gears, that could impact our overall financial future, right?
I got a couple more questions I want to ask you, but everybody's getting loud upstairs. You hear they're so excited about this interview. So let me take a short break and yell at them, okay? Okay. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. Stay with us. Welcome back to Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV Big Fox. We return to our interview now. So should investors be making adjustments now, or is it better to take a wait and see approach as the administration is only a month old?
Yeah. I'm not a big fan of making adjustments based on prediction,
Okay.
right? And sort of that's the stage I think we're at right now. If we make major shifts, we're just predicting what we think the outcomes are.
Right.
It's not necessarily a wait and see though either, right?
Right.
There's got to have some balance. So it's a revisit what's in front of us. What can we take advantage of right now? What can we optimize for ourselves within our own plan? And again, bring back a lot of those fundamentals. This is about diversification, balance. This is about your time horizon. What are you trying to achieve? And the discipline in approaching it in that fashion, not necessarily reacting to every news story, because like we said earlier, right? I mean, the news cycle is 24/7, and we'll go nuts over that, right? So we just have to focus on what our ultimate goals and objectives are and optimize based on what we know now.
Yeah.
That it means we have to create a positive cash flow situation in our weekly budget, whatever that is, right? And that means that when we do that, we can pay off debt if we've accumulated. Not all debt is bad debt, right? So learn what that really means. Mortgages are pretty good debt to have. I could even vouch for a 0% car loan, right?
Okay.
But get rid of the bad debt.
Right.
Get to a point where we're saving for our future, because we don't know what the future holds. And if you're really fearful of what an administration or some, what Congress might do or the president might do, the best way to insulate yourself is to not be reliant on what they're going to give you, but reliant on, this is what I built for myself. And so that's the best thing we can do, is just kind of come back to those fundamental basics of just proper financial health.
And that's a good lesson in general. It doesn't have to do with who's the president, who's not. Just take absolutely. Looking beyond this administration, what long-term economic trends should investors be watching, regardless of whoever's in office?
I think, depending on your timeline, the things I would be paying attention to in terms of how to direct and guide our own personal financial plans is what happens with tax laws overall, and be ready to pounce on opportunities.
Sure.
I heard recently, Trump wants to eliminate the capital gains tax. That would suggest that people need to hurry up and take a lot of capital gains. That's not necessarily the best thing to do, right? Because if you're in a good, solid, long-term investment plan, it's not about churning your investments, right? So it does mean that we have to apply the opportunities that we have, though, to our own financial plan. One thing I like to talk to clients about is this concept of tax diversification, because we know what taxes are right now. And we've taken some steps over the last few years, knowing that we have some tax provisions that are expiring, and what can we take advantage of now in case they are not extended, and we think they are going to be. But it's looking at, what can I set myself up for that's being taxed now, because the tax rates on taxable monies now aren't horrible in some ways. What can I do to not pay tax until later on a certain amount of my investments, and then what can I set up so that I never pay tax again? And that's using like Roth IRAs and so on, and capitalize on making on a lot of opportunities, but optimizing our overall tax situation. And this is just a small piece of an overall financial plan. Is take what you have in front of you now, which is a pretty good tax regime. Yes, we can plan on the fact that is going to be extended, but it doesn't mean wait, right? It means take some measured opportunities now.
Just before we go on, thank you for this. This was really informative. Where can people find out more if they have questions for you?
You can find us on all social networks, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and so on. We also have a very, very informative and robust website, jgua.com, which has a lot of links to blogs, articles. We have a couple of podcasts out there. If we have people that listen to podcasts, there's a lot of ways that you can find us. And you can always pick up the telephone and call. And
the old-fashioned way.
The old-fashioned way.
Well, thanks so much for giving us so much time this morning and helping people out.
Frank, it's been a real pleasure.
All right, we'll be right back with Frankly Speaking. Stay with us. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam, brought to you by Boss Security in Horseheads. Contact them today for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio here on Market Street in Corning. We have a lot of comments to catch up on. Let's get right to them. Ken writes, after the Democrats' tactics during Trump's first 4 years and the Trump bashing in the 4 years that the puppet was at the Resolute desk, it amazes me that the Dems and legacy media still think their misinformation, twisting the truth, and outright lies are a winning strategy. And this, I believe, is probably in reference to some of the media updates we brought to you this morning. I might be too optimistic, but I think even the lowest information sheeple must see that the only logical reason that the Democrats, and in fairness, some Republicans, are besides themselves when someone is trying to cut waste and inefficiency in the federal government is that their personal gravy train is in jeopardy of going away. Their actions might qualify as a definition of insanity, doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. Thanks, Ken. Comment from a different viewer. They're worried about those Why don't they worry about the people in prison who are getting Social Security numbers and filing taxes in my name for refunds? Yes, that is a major scam issue. Thank you for that. Comment from a different viewer. The Democrats are supposed to be a party that supports labor. As a 30-year union roofer, I can assure you this is not true. They don't support the guards or the guards either. Yes, I know we were talking about the strike in Elmira and at Collins, but in Elmira specifically. Thank you. Mark writes in, they're talking about people leaving D.C. and selling their houses. How many have done the same in New York under our failing governor's watch? Yes, we've talked about that, the mass exodus in New York time and time again. That's a very good point. Comment from a different viewer. It amazes me as to how Democrats think young people are too stupid to do work of importance like auditing government spending. The sad thing is they vote for the people that call them stupid. Yes, there has been quite a weird attack on the younger people involved with Doge. Whether you want to admit it or not, younger people seem to have a better grasp at technology, and you know that Elon Musk is hiring those type of young people. Okay, comment from a different viewer. No wonder the U.S. is in so much debt to China. We are finally getting the truth as how we got there. It's not like we are not taxed to death, but misled by the Democratic Party. Thank you. He also adds, I heard on the news Nissan is contemplating moving its plant from Mexico to the U.S., and Corning Incorporated is now going to build another plant in the U.S. to build solar panels, so the tariffs are working. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I like this comment here from a different viewer. Great interview with Jason Nickerson. Yeah, he did a great job, didn't he? I believe that he would be a useful advisor in your run for governor. Winky face. Thank you very much. All right, a couple of you. So that's 2 votes I think I'd have at this point. Not running. But thank you. That made me chuckle this morning. And final comment as we catch up here. Speaking of mayors, when was the last time we got an update on the crazy super mayor? What's she been up to lately? Yes, I was wondering the same question. We bring up Dalton Mayor Tiffany Henyard a lot on the program only because I think it's a great example, not because she's in our area, she's in Illinois, but because it's a prime example of knowing who you're voting for at the local level. So many people don't pay attention to the local levels. They maybe only pay attention to the presidential, gubernatorial, something like that, maybe congressional. But really the local elections can affect your day-to-day life more than any. So I did do a quick Google search, and it turns out her lawsuit, yes, she had a lawsuit against the village trustees, but it was dismissed by a judge. Henyard accused trustees of conspiring to take away her authority to appoint a new police chief, village administrator, and village attorney after trustees sued to block Henyard from making those decisions. This is coming from ABC 7 Chicago. The judge dismissed the case. Why? No one from Henyard's legal team showed up for a hearing earlier this week. So there's your update on the world's super mayor, Tiffany Henyard. Okay. Well, all right, got to take a break already. We've got a couple. I knew that was going to take a whole segment. Thank you for all the comments. Keep them coming in. I think we're actually doing okay. Yeah, we're doing okay. When we were just talking about Doge, Hayden Du Bois has a piece of something that we may not have thought about when it comes to Doge. Originally, it was suggested that some federal employees would no longer be located in Washington, that there would be a move to other locations. Well, the Department of Government Efficiency has yet to begin its most important task, according to Hayden Du Bois, fulfilling President Trump's promise to move 100,000 federal employees out of Washington, D.C. This would build on the president's first-term efforts to relocate agencies. While the savings could be enormous, the biggest benefit would be restoring much-needed ideological balance to the vast federal bureaucracy. Virtually everyone knows the federal government leans left, but in a new study, you see how really liberal Washington, D.C. is. Du Bois looked at roughly 25 years of federal employee data, ranging from the Clinton administration to Trump's first term, matched with the National Voter Database. While the relatively small number of presidential appointees generally reflect the political affiliation of the sitting president in both Republican and Democrat administrations, those appointees don't carry out the day-to-day work of the government, the bureaucrats. That duty falls to the career senior executive service, the thousands of assistant secretaries, deputy counsel, and program directors who oversee federal regulation and determine whether the agencies follow the orders of the president. Among those senior bureaucrats, Democrats have a 30-point advantage over Republicans. And if you want to see the exact numbers, you can go to this piece. It's actually at the New York Post this morning. I don't want to read each various government entity, but he did. The worst being housing and urban development with a plus 57% Democrat advantage. but a 30-point advantage over Republicans, a number that has barely budged in the last 3 decades. To be sure, hiring Democrats is perfectly acceptable, but the leftist domination of federal agencies increases the likelihood that bureaucrats refuse to follow the orders of a democratically elected Republican president and his legally appointed political nominees. And we've talked about that in the past. Politico did a piece all but acknowledging the deep state, saying that bureaucrats need to kind of be the fly in the ointment to stop some of Trump's initiatives. Bureaucratic resistance to Trump was legion and legendary in his first administration. A Neapolitan Institute survey in January found that 46% of federal managers are still willing to ignore the president's orders, not because those orders are illegal, but simply because they don't agree. And we've had this conversation in the past, the nameless, faceless bureaucrats that think they know better than the man duly elected by the voters, that they think that they have more power, should have more say than the president of the United States. I thought that was a really interesting piece. The Associated Press released early this morning that top Russian and U.S. officials are meeting for talks on the Ukraine war without Kiev this morning. The meeting marks another pivotal step by the Trump administration to reverse U.S. policy on isolating Russia and is meant to pave the way for a meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump earlier this month upended U.S. policy toward Ukraine and Russia by saying he and Putin had agreed to begin negotiations on ending the war. Now, we know that Zelensky has said that there are no negotiations. There's no talks to be had unless Ukraine is a part of the conversation, and that his country won't accept the outcome if they are not involved. Now, the NATO boss lauded Trump's leadership on Ukraine, telling Europe, get your act together. The head of NATO on Monday praised President Trump for taking the initiative to pursue an end to the Ukrainian war and knocked Europe for complaining instead of getting its act together. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, 58, who has been dubbed the Trump Whisperer, emphasized the importance of American leadership to ending Russia's war on Ukraine and suggested that European countries are beginning to step up because of it. I have great trust in the American team conducting those talks. Ukraine will be part of those talks, no doubt, Rutte said. Europe wants to have a place at the table. Well, I told them, fight yourself a way to the table by coming up with a concrete proposal. That is now happening. I absolutely reject the criticism of President Trump's initiative. I think it's the only right that he tries to end the war, and we need American leadership here. NATO allies and the European Union huddled at the Munich Security Conference in Germany over the weekend to discuss pressing foreign policy issues, including Trump's push to end the war in Ukraine. Now, UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer insists U.S. security guarantee is the only path to peace in Ukraine. A security guarantee from the United States is the only way to achieve lasting peace between Ukraine and Russia and to stop the Kremlin from further aggression. That's British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Came out with that statement late last night. Starmer made the plea as he and other European leaders emerged from an emergency summit in Paris in response to U.S. officials' Tuesday meeting with Russian diplomats in Saudi Arabia about potential steps to end the war, without reps from Ukraine or other European nations being on hand. Quote, Europe must play its role, and I'm prepared to consider committing British forces on the ground alongside others if there is a lasting peace agreement. But there must be a U.S. backstop, because a U.S. security guarantee is the only way to effectively deter Russia from attacking Ukraine again. Okay. Now, we had talked earlier. Do I have time here? We had talked earlier about the speech given by J.D. Vance in Germany. And according to Kenneth Weinstein is the president emeritus and Japan chair at Hudson Institute. He said that Vice President J.D. Vance told a group of outraged elites at the Munich Security Conference that European politicians must do a better job of responding to their voters' concern rather than ignoring or censoring them. And there's a lot of pushback, again, some very nasty, divisive rhetoric coming from the media on this speech. Many people, though, especially Trump supporters, found it very refreshing. Vance's forceful rhetoric made good on President Trump's promise to fight for the long overlooked interests of ordinary citizens. Nothing proved Vance's point more to me this weekend than the gulf between the elite conference goers and the regular Germans I chatted with. Average Germans understand their nation is in crisis and are exasperated that it took an American leader to say so. Germany's once vaunted industrial prowess is a thing of the past. It trails even its European neighbors in fields from digital technology to rail infrastructure. And he goes through, and this is quite a lengthy piece, but the Trump administration is issuing a warning, one that European leaders have ignored from their own people for far too long. It's time for them to follow Trump's lead and ensure that our alliances work for the average citizen, not the elites in Brussels and Washington. All right, we got a couple last minute things we're going to wrap up on. Get those comments in. I'll try to read all the comments that we can right in our way out the door because it's almost time for the end of the Tuesday edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you again to Jason Nickerson from the John G. Ullman and Associates. I really appreciate that time that you gave us to talk about some very important issues. So I thought that was a very interesting interview. A quick reminder that on Thursday, former Congressman and current Assemblyman Joe Semplinsky will be our guest in the 7 o'clock hour on Thursday. So get your questions to him. You can obviously, like you always do, comment during our interview, but it sometimes is easier if I have some ahead of time. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask someone, a federal question, a state question, or even running for office question, because he is the chairman of the Steuben County Republican Committee, Joe Semplinsky is the go-to guest. So let's take a short break. We'll be right back with Frankly Speaking here on WYDC TV, Big Fox. The Frankly Speaking Roof Cam brought to you by Boss Security and Horseheads. Contact Boss Security for all your business and home security needs. Welcome back as we broadcast live from the Hesselson studio. Having a blast on the show this morning. Ken writes in, Frank, I don't envy you. Being charged with finding a Trump protester to sit with you and calmly and coherently discuss their concerns about Trump and Doge. That will be a heavy lift. I think probably insurmountable. I don't see that being, number one, not necessarily the most relevant interview. But any Trump supporter or non-Trump supporter at any time can feel free to comment and weigh in. We've read those numerous times on the program. Thank you, Ken. Hochul, there's a piece by, just to wrap up on New York State issues very quickly here. Michael Benjamin highlighted some of the things out of the budget, the $252 billion New York State budget. And as we talked about with Joe Semplinsky and Phil Palmisano, when you have numbers that big, of course, there's going to be some good. But overall, there's so much bad in this. What Michael Benjamin learned is that it offers cash for unions while making cuts for autistic children. Alarmed parents and a group have learned that Governor Kathy Hochul's massive budget proposal, which aims to increase state spending by $19 billion, or 8.3%, includes one outrageous cut. It will slice state spending on Medicaid payments for behavior therapy helpful to the children. For parents of autistic kids, this idea of melting down in a store or restaurant or family gathering can be mortifying. Stimming, I believe is how this is pronounced, repetitive behaviors like rocking, hand flapping, vocalization, or in our oldest boy's case, Michael Benjamin writes, spitting, is common among autistic children and adults, often as a means of relieving stress or sensory overload. So what he's saying is that cut is for therapy to help with this at a time when we're talking about a budget that sees an increase of $19 billion. And we're going to be talking about the budget in the future with Senator Tom O'Mara. Got an interview in the works with him. We'll have Phil on again to continue to talk about the discussions over the budget. Now, I mentioned earlier, Kathy Hochul is assembling key leaders to discuss the path forward regarding Eric Adams. Hochul announced a dramatic move in a Monday night statement that cited the troubling allegations swirling around Adams and the shocking resignation of his 4 crucial aides, including First Deputy Mayor Maria Torres Springer, earlier yesterday. Quote, if they feel unable to serve in City Hall at this time, that raises serious questions about the long-term future of this mayoral administration. City Council Speaker Adrian Adams, Comptroller Brad Lander, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, and Queensborough President Donovan Richards are among the leaders expected to meet with the governor, according to the New York Post. Speaker Adams, Lander, who is running for mayor, and Richards would all potentially sit on an inability committee that could lead to Adams' ouster or at least temporarily remove him from office. Reverend Al Sharpton will also be in attendance, according to a source. The meeting will be in person and remote and last throughout the day. Hochul is the only official in the state that has sole power to boot Adams from his post. She previously did not rule out the drastic move after allegations emerged last week that President Trump's Department of Justice agreed to drop the federal corruption charges against Adams if the Democrat agreed to help with the White House crackdown on illegal immigration. And that's why you look at the numbers. According to a new betting site, Cuomo's New York City mayor's race, he's surging in those betting odds. People think that he will be victorious in that race. That is it for today's edition of Frankly Speaking. Thank you again to Jason Nickerson for being our guest on the program. Thank you for all the comments. Man, great discussions this morning. Really appreciate it. I hope that you'll join us every weekday morning starting at 6 a.m. for Frankly Speaking, only on WYDC TV. Big Fox, have a great day, everyone, and we will see you tomorrow morning bright and early. I look forward to it already.